5 recruits cornered her in the mess hall. 30 seconds later, they learned she was a Navy SEAL. The sound of trays clattering and boots scraping against the waxed floor filled the air, yet inside that circle, time seemed to slow. Emma Hayes stood in the center, her posture calm, shoulders squared, as if the chaos around her didn't belong to her world. The recruits, young, cocky, and eager to prove themselves, had mistaken her quiet demeanor for weakness. They were wrong. But long before that moment, Emma had been a different woman. She was the daughter of a steelworker and a schoolteacher, born in a small town where dreams often ended at the county line. Growing up, she carried within her a stubborn resolve, one that wasn't loud or flashy but steady, like the rhythm of her father's hammer striking metal. She wasn't the kind of child to seek the spotlight. Instead, she chased the horizon, always asking questions too large for her age. Why not me? Why not here? When she enlisted, people doubted her. Navy SEALs? That's not for women, they'd whispered. She remembered their looks, half pity, half disbelief. Yet she carried those words into every push-up, every mile run, every freezing plunge into seawater. The harder they doubted, the stronger her resolve grew. By the time she walked into that mess hall years later, Emma was no longer the girl of small-town whispers. She was a decorated operator, though you wouldn't know it by the way she carried herself. There was humility in her stride, a stillness in her presence. She never introduced herself with titles. She let her actions speak, and often they spoke louder than anyone dared to expect. That day, the recruits were fresh out of training, still drunk on adrenaline and bravado. They didn't know who she was, only that she was older, quieter, and that in their eyes, she didn't look like them. One of them, tall with a restless smirk, stepped forward, his voice carrying over the chatter of the hall. "Hey, ma'am, this section's for sailors. Officers eat somewhere else." Emma looked at him, not with anger, but with something softer, pity almost. She placed her tray down gently, her hands steady, her gaze unflinching. Around them, laughter trickled in, chairs scraping as others leaned to watch. The second recruit added, "You don't look like you belong here. Maybe you should stick to the sidelines." His words were meant to sting, but Emma's heart didn't quicken. She had heard worse. She had survived worse. The mess hall grew quieter, the way it always does before a storm. Emma let the silence stretch. Then, with a calm voice, low and even, she said, "Do you think belonging is something handed to you, or something you earn?" They laughed, misunderstanding her tone. What happened next was not loud, nor cruel, nor exaggerated. It was precise. Within half a minute, their arrogance crumbled. A wrist caught, a grip redirected, a swift motion that left one recruit pinned against the table without a single bruise showing. Another tried to circle behind her, but found himself staring at the floor before he realized he'd even been moved. Emma never raised her voice, never broke her stillness. Her body spoke with years of training. Measured, efficient, controlled. 30 seconds. That was all it took. When it was over, the recruits stood awkwardly, cheeks flushed, hearts pounding with a mix of shock and shame. Emma didn't gloat. She simply picked up her tray again, her expression unchanged, and sat at a corner table. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Then, slowly, whispers began to ripple. Someone finally said it out loud, almost in disbelief. "She's a SEAL." Emma didn't turn to acknowledge it. She didn't need to. The truth was enough, and it belonged to her. That night, as she walked back to her quarters, the weight of the day pressed on her. Not the confrontation itself, but the reminder of how invisible her story often felt. Years of sacrifice, of bone-deep exhaustion, of proving herself again and again, only to face the same question, "Do you belong here?" She paused outside her door, letting the cool night air brush against her face. Somewhere inside her, the memory of cold surf training nights stirred, the sound of waves crashing against her ears, the sting of salt water in her eyes. Those memories grounded her. They reminded her that every doubt she faced, every barrier, had forged her into something unshakable. Inside, alone in her room, she set her boots aside and sat at the edge of the bed. For the first time that day, Her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the release of holding herself together in a world that demanded too much, too often. She whispered a quiet prayer. Not for strength, because she already carried that, but for grace, so she could keep meeting each challenge without hardening her heart. Emma Hayes had spent her life breaking the mold that others had built for her. And though moments like the mess hall reminded her of the uphill climb, they also carried a truth she could never deny. She had earned her place. And no one, not 5 recruits, not a room full of doubters, could ever take that away. The mess hall incident became a whisper that traveled far faster than she did. Within days, recruits nodded differently when she passed, their eyes carrying a flicker of respect, or perhaps fear. But Emma Hayes knew too well that respect was fragile. In the military, especially in the SEALs, it had to be earned every single day. Still, what gnawed at her most wasn't the doubts of strangers. It was the shadows she carried from years before, the relentless push to prove herself in a world that never wanted to believe she belonged. Training had been the crucible where those shadows first grew sharp. She remembered the day vividly, freezing ocean water clawing at her lungs, instructors shouting as waves pounded her body into submission. Around her, men twice her size struggled, cursed, and sometimes quit. She never quit, but her body betrayed her. Tremors ran through her limbs, and once, in the dead of night during drown-proofing, her chest seized in panic as her bound wrists kept her from reaching the surface. She could still hear the instructor's voice, low, cutting, meant to break her spirit. Hayes, go home. You don't have what it takes. Nobody's going to rescue you. The words had sunk deeper than the salt water. She survived that night, but survival didn't erase the echo. Even after becoming a SEAL, even after proving herself in combat, that voice sometimes returned in quiet moments, when her heart raced for no reason, or when she caught her reflection in a mirror and wondered if she looked like someone who belonged. Her struggle wasn't just physical, it was invisible. Anxiety, the kind she never admitted out loud, pressed against her chest. She wore her composure like armor, but underneath, there were cracks she rarely let anyone see. One deployment in particular carved those cracks wider. It was a mission in a narrow valley overseas, where the silence of the landscape was broken by sudden chaos. The team had been ambushed, and Emma found herself separated in the haze of dust and gunfire. She remembered dragging a wounded comrade to cover, blood seeping through his uniform, his weight pressing into her shoulders. Bullets cracked against rock around her, and still, she pushed forward, her teeth clenched, her body screaming to give in. When they made it back, the team called her fearless. But she didn't feel fearless. She felt haunted. For weeks afterward, the smell of sand and smoke lived in her nostrils. At night, her dreams carried her back to that valley, to the sound of gunfire and the pressure of a life in her hands. She woke drenched in sweat, her hands trembling in the dark. In the mess hall, when those recruits cornered her, it wasn't just their laughter that stung. It was the memory of every shadow, every doubt, every voice that had tried to push her out. To them, it had been a game. To her, it was the return of ghosts she had fought to bury. Yet Emma had never been one to collapse beneath her pain. She found outlets, sometimes in the silence of long runs at dawn, the rhythm of her breath syncing with her pounding footsteps, the horizon slowly lighting in shades of pink and gold. Other times, she wrote. Her journal was battered and stained, pages filled with words she'd never say aloud, confessions of fear, anger, grief, and the small sparks of gratitude that kept her alive. But her greatest struggle wasn't inside training grounds or battlefields. It was in coming home. Civilian life was supposed to be easier, but in truth, it was lonelier. People thanked her for her service, but their eyes glazed over when she tried to explain what it meant to wake up sweating from dreams of gunfire, or to flinch at the sound of fireworks on the 4th of July. She sat at family gatherings, smiling politely, while inside, a storm raged quietly, unseen. Her mother once reached for her hand across the dinner table and said gently, "You don't have to carry it all alone." Emma had smiled, but the words pressed too close to the truth she couldn't share. The struggle of being both visible and invisible defined her days. She could stand in a room and command respect with her presence, yet feel entirely unseen in her pain. That duality weighed heavier than any rucksack she had carried on deployment. But through it all, there was a thread of resilience woven through every hardship. She didn't always feel strong. In fact, many nights, she felt the opposite. Yet strength, she came to learn, wasn't the absence of struggle. It was showing up again, even when your chest was tight, even when your hands shook, even when the world kept asking if you belonged. Emma's journey was never about erasing struggle. It was about living with it, honoring it, and refusing to let it define her limits. The mess hall incident had been a spark, one that reminded her how far she had come, but also how much further she had to go in reconciling with herself. As she lay awake one night, the distant hum of the bass settling into silence, she whispered into the dark, "I belong here. Even if it breaks me, I belong." It was not a declaration of pride, but of survival. And in her heart, she knew the struggle was far from over. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint buzz of the fluorescent light above Emma's bunk. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the same mantra circling through her thoughts. I belong here. Even if it breaks me, I belong. Yet the words felt fragile, as if one more sleepless night, one more memory clawing its way back, would unravel them completely. It was during one of those nights that her breaking point met her turning point. Emma had been assigned to mentor a small group of recruits during their first grueling weeks of physical training. On paper, it was routine, nothing she hadn't done before. But when she saw their faces, wide-eyed with exhaustion and brimming with doubt, she recognized her own younger self staring back. One recruit in particular, Petty Officer Daniels, caught her attention. He was strong, eager, but haunted by a quiet fear that flickered in his eyes when the instructors pushed too hard. During drownproofing, she noticed him thrashing against the water, the same way she had all those years ago. His bound wrists strained, bubbles rising furiously to the surface. Instinct pulled her forward, but she hesitated. Intervening too early could cost him his chance to learn. Waiting too long could cost him his spirit. She leaned down, her voice firm but steady, carrying across the pool. Breathe with the water, not against it. Trust that you can last longer than your fear. Something shifted. Daniels stilled. The panic softened into rhythm, his body beginning to move with control rather than against it. He resurfaced minutes later, coughing and shaking but alive with triumph. The look he shot her was not of gratitude alone, it was recognition. He had seen his fear, and he had not drowned. That moment pierced something inside Emma. For years she had carried the belief that her struggles were hers alone, invisible weights that no one else could understand. But as she watched Daniel stumble out of the pool, she realized, every recruit, every SEAL, carried ghosts of their own. Fear was not her private shame, it was the shared language of survival. The turning point wasn't sudden or loud. It didn't come with fireworks or applause. It came in small echoes, the gratitude in Daniel's nod, the strength she saw kindling in others as she pushed them through the same fires she had endured. It was as if, by guiding them, she was slowly rewriting the story she had carried in silence. Weeks later, she found herself back in the mess hall, the same room where 5 recruits had once tested her. This time, she sat among the younger sailors, laughing at their clumsy jokes, answering their endless questions. Someone asked her bluntly, "Chief, were you ever scared during training?" The hall quieted at the question. Eyes turned to her, expecting denial or bravado. But Emma inhaled deeply, letting the silence stretch before she answered. "Every day," she said simply. "Fear was my shadow. But I learned that shadows don't vanish by fighting them. They fade when you learn to walk with them." The recruits exchanged glances, some surprised, some relieved. In their silence, Emma recognized something sacred, the power of vulnerability. By admitting her fear, she hadn't weakened her image, she had strengthened theirs. Later that night, she opened her journal. Her handwriting was uneven, the ink pressed deep into the paper as if anchoring the words in place. "I am not fearless. I never was. But maybe being a SEAL isn't about erasing fear, it's about carrying it, owning it, and teaching others that they can carry theirs too." For the first time in years, the weight on her chest lightened. She felt the possibility of healing not as a distant dream, but as something already unfolding within her. The turning point deepened when she was invited to speak at a graduation ceremony for the newest class of SEAL candidates. Standing before them, the rows of young faces, she felt the old tremor in her hands return. But this time, she welcomed it. The tremor reminded her she was alive, human, and connected. She began her speech without notes, her voice carrying across the silent hall. You've been through the fire, and some of you carry scars already. Don't hide them. Those scars are proof you endured, proof that you belong. And when doubt comes, and it will, remember that strength isn't the absence of fear. It's the courage to act while fear is still in your chest. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was sincere. And in the midst of it, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. That night, as she walked along the shoreline near the base, the waves rolling steadily under a starlit sky, she let the salt air fill her lungs. She remembered the countless nights of training when the same ocean had felt like her enemy, cold and merciless. Now, it felt different, like an old adversary who had become a teacher. She whispered into the night, I belong here. Not because I fought the water, but because I learned to breathe with it. Emma Hayes was no longer carrying her struggle alone. She was transforming it, turning the weight of her pain into a bridge for others. And in that transformation, she discovered a truth more powerful than any victory. Healing was not about erasing the past, but about finding purpose within it. The years had softened some memories, but they had not erased them. Emma Hayes still carried the echoes of gunfire in her dreams, still felt the cold sting of seawater in her bones on certain nights, still remembered the weight of doubt pressing against her chest. Yet as she stood now on the quiet porch of her home, overlooking a wide stretch of ocean, the sound of waves no longer summoned fear. They carried something else: acceptance. Her service had ended months earlier, a transition marked not by ceremony, but by silence. She had folded her uniform one last time, the fabric stiff with years of wear, and placed it carefully in a cedar chest. No cameras, no applause. Just the whisper of fabric against wood, and the quiet acknowledgement that a chapter of her life had closed. Civilian life came with its own battles. Crowded grocery stores made her pulse quicken, sudden noises pulled her back to places she no longer stood. But Emma had learned to meet those moments with patience rather than shame. Therapy helped, as did long runs at dawn, her breath misting in the cool air while the horizon bloomed with color. And when the storms inside her grew too loud, she returned to the ocean, not to fight it, but to let it remind her of the rhythm she had once feared and now respected. In her community, she found a new calling. The local high school invited her to speak to students about resilience. At first, she hesitated, unsure of how her story could fit into their world of textbooks and locker-lined hallways. But when she stood in front of them, her heart steady, she saw their eyes widen, not at tales of combat or training, but at the moments of honesty. I wasn't fearless, she told them, her voice soft yet unwavering. I was afraid almost every day. But fear doesn't make you weak. Hiding from it does. What makes you strong is choosing to stand up, even when your knees shake.